everybody. After our week-long hiatus, a very brief moment in time that actually ended up feeling like several eternities, we are finally back with our weekly Vinland Saga video, and today we're talking about episode 18, Out of the Cradle. But before we get into things proper, I do want to give a big shout out to my boy at Nacho Gashardo for sharing last week's video over on Twitter, and if you too would like to have your name shouted out in next week's Vinland Saga video, then be sure to share this video around on the internet, and then tag me at JoJo Talks Too Much over on Twitter, and I will be sure to shout your name out in next week's video. Okay, so as I've said before in a couple different videos, these aren't exactly episodic reviews. It's easy to label them as that, since when we come to talk to in our weekly recaps of each show, we're usually talking about the most recent episode that passed. But sometimes I have to just ramble about how the show makes me feel in general, and I had this moment after this episode wrapped where I was sitting there in stunned silent just by how good this episode was. And it made me realize, for a long time, pretty much from the moment it ended, I was positive. There's no doubt in my mind, The Promised Neverland was my anime of the year. I was just convinced. And then Fruits Basket came, and I was like, okay, Fruits Basket might be my anime of the year, because this is really, really good, but I still think it might be Promised Neverland. And Promised Neverland held that all the way till now. Even when Vinland Saga hit, I was like, this is something special, but is it as good as Promised Neverland? And the two battled the entire time, and this may have been the tipping point where Vinland Saga is like, I reign champion, I reign supreme. Because man, this show is special and different in ways that I can't entirely describe, but this episode really does feel like it has, the message itself. For a moment, I was almost wondering if maybe the prince was learning the wrong lesson, because it's not one that you hear often. Normally it's the whole, every show is typically love is all you need. But in this one, they almost ask, is that true though? Vinland Saga is not afraid to ask questions that other shows would dance around. Whereas here, it's brutal and raw and real, but at the same time, it's entirely genuine. And, genuinely heartfelt. I was crying during moments of this episode. Not just one moment, but, several moments. I was genuinely, really in my emotions. I was in my own head watching this week's episode. It's just phenomenal. And I'm kind of... if you can't tell, I'm recording this immediately after seeing it. There's this Vinland Saga, Promised Neverland, and Fruits Basket. Each show has left me recording my thoughts on the episode, where I almost have to struggle to form my thoughts into a cohesive and coherent video, because I'm just all over the place, just because it was such a blast of emotions, especially from Canute, who is easily one of, his arc has been one of the most entertaining, frustrating, and fascinating to watch develop. From the moment that we met him till now, he feels like he's grown exponentially in ways that some characters couldn't even hope to grow over the course of an entire series. He's grown over the course of the first season. So I feel like that really says a lot about the show in general. And I don't know, it's just one of those episodes where I just have to kind of sit there quiet afterwards. And let it be said, though, while there is a lot of deep thoughts in this week's episode, while there is a lot to ponder and a lot of emotions to be had, it is still a Studio Witch show, so there's also a hell of a lot of hype to be found here as well, in particular with Thorfinn versus Thorkel, which is the fight that we were waiting an eternity. Like I said, it wasn't that long, but man did it feel like it, just to get to this moment where we can finally see Thorfinn versus Thorkel. And their battle is some of the best moments in this week's episode, seeing them go toe-to-toe. So, some of the animation is a bit when you're doing the overhead view, I did have a moment where I was like, okay, that's a little wonky. There's moments where they're like, yeah, you can't see it, but it's just one arm move, other arm move, and then Thorfinn jumps back, but but because it's an overhead shot, I'm kind of willing to let it go. You know what I mean? It was an overhead shot just to show how many people were watching the Thorfinn versus Thorkel fight. And once you're actually in the fight, once you're there with the characters, it is stunningly well handled. Also, they totally used clips from this episode in particular. They knew how important this episode was going to be. They actually straight up used clips from this episode in the opening, which, while I was like, yeah, that's right, that's how important this week's episode was, by the end I was like, that's a little cheap. So that's a little cheap, isn't it? Because they do the same thing for the ED, where they just use clips from the show. And I was like, okay, well, if the ED does it, that's fine, but like, I'm gonna let the OP, I'm gonna let it go because the OP is definitely, clearly, its own material. Turns out that's not true. It's just that Studio Wit's animation is so dope that I mistook stuff from the OP, which traditionally has the more intense animation and more flashy visuals, to actually, I mistook it for opening footage specifically made for the opening. Instead, it was actually made for this week's episode, and I'm not really sure how I feel about it. Like I said, it feels kind of cheap, but at the same time, I'm not like upset, because it just means that that's how important this episode was. I don't know how I feel about that. I would love to know what you guys think. Is it cool to use footage from the show in the opening? Or are you guys sort of like, well, you could have done something else? Like, I don't know. I guess it's not really a big deal. It's just something worth noting that I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of, But again, like I was saying, it doesn't matter, because the entire episode is so freaking good that even like small issues that I have are washed away with the lessons the show's trying to impart, the action the show is trying to demonstrate, and just like the growth of these separate characters, and even little falls that the characters have. Like when Thorfinn's in the midst of the fight with Thorkel asks him what being a true warrior means. And this is mirrored with the priest and Canute. I always forget the priest's name and I feel bad. Like Will something. But this is mirrored with the priest and Canute, who are talking about what love means. So you see these two characters on similar yet different journeys and interacting with this, not parental figure, but this like mentor-esque figure in their lives at different moments in time, or at the same moment in time, but just in different areas. And what I loved about this is that the two characters, while they're on similar paths, they take different, not so much different approaches, but they end up going down different directions, because while Canute rises, Thorfinn falls. And I actually mean that kind of literally when you think about what happens at the end of the episode. But Thorfinn being not so much tricked, although he does say like that's a dirty move, is when Thorkel asks, is like they're in the midst of fighting, and Thorkel does like the disrobe thing that he does in the opening, and he asks Thorfinn like, hey Thorfinn, what does being a true warrior mean? Because Thorkel even thinks that he's lacking this. It's not just Thorfinn, he's lacking this as well. If he had this, then he'd be fighting with like at a full capacity as a true warrior, if he just knew what it meant to be that. And that triggers a memory of Thor's. So all this time goes by, and it's still a loss that Thorfinn will never get over, is the loss of Thor's. I mean, I hope down the road he will, because it really wasn't his fault. Like, I mean, like, he was a boy. Like, it's not his fault in the same way that Bruce Wayne can't actually blame himself for the death of his parents. He's a boy. And it's stuff like that where I'm like, you were a child. Like, you can't go there. And Thorfinn not being able to accept it, like it actually takes him out of the fight, because now all he can think about is Thor's. And the fact that Thor's was, as every character says, a true warrior. So whatever being a true warrior means, Thor's had it. So if I had to speculate, it's just that Thor's didn't really want to fight and only fought when needed. And Canute even kind of mirrors this towards the end of the episode, where he says, like, you guys want a meaning to this? Then you follow me, because I will show you what it means to fight and what's worth fighting for, and give meaning to your life and death. And okay, I'll get to Canute in a second, but I want to wrap up with Thorfinn by saying, like, Thorfinn, I know people, like, I know even our boy Nacho Gashardo, who shares, I feel like, every Vinland Saga video. Thank you, by the way, my boy. But even he has issue with Thorfinn. Like, I know every person who I talk about Vinland Saga with, if they're a manga reader, they say Thorfinn grows exponentially, so he does grow on you. But if they're an anime only like me, they scream how much they love the show, but also lament how much they don't like Thorfinn. And I actually like Thorfinn. I think his journey is interesting. I'm always curious to see what he's gonna say, what he's gonna do, and how he's gonna react to things. Because I do feel like the Thorfinn that we knew from way back in episode 1, he's still in there. He's locked behind like nothing but darkness, hate, and vengeance, but he's still in there. And I'm always kind of curious as to what he'll do and how he'll act. And now I'm really, really curious to see how he'll respond to Prince Canute, because those two were forming this sort of like bromance a little bit, like not a huge bromance, but I could see the building blocks placed. But now that Canute's almost like an entirely different person, I almost wonder how that relationship is going to evolve or devolve, and I'm really curious to see how that pans out for the rest of the series, because I think this show is going for 25 episodes, so we got 7 more to go, I think. I could be wrong, it could be like another number, but I just feel like 25 is, for some reason, that's the number that's in my head. I'm probably wrong. I could look it up and be a professional, but let's be real, you don't watch these videos for professionalism now, do you? The big character that I actually want to talk about for a little bit before the video ends, and I have a lot to say, is Canute, who, again, is a character who I wasn't, like, particularly fond of when the show began. If you go back a couple videos, you'll note that there's times where I say, I don't like this character. He's driving me crazy. I don't like his attitude. I don't like anything about him. I think he's a coward. I think he's blah, blah, blah. Like, I just really didn't like Canute, and I couldn't understand him until this episode. And, well, I shouldn't say until this episode. This is, like, if you go back and you watch, at the very beginning, I say how I'm confused by this character. I don't like this character. And then over time, you see me sort of growing a little bit more attached each episode that he's in, and each time he has something to do, which unfortunately is rare in the earlier parts of his character. I feel like maybe that could have made me a little bit more endeared to him. But by this episode, where he's forced to say goodbye to Ragnar, like when he's laying in the snow, broken and tired, mostly just tired, I was like, this show is gonna make me cry for a character who I didn't even like at the start. And I was right, because Canute saying goodbye to Ragnar, another character who I didn't like initially, is probably one of the saddest things, not just of the autumn season, but maybe of the entire year. Because it was so, even though it's a dream sequence, it really did feel like that was Ragnar. Just because that's how well Canute knew Ragnar, that even though it's a dream and it's just Prince Canute's subconscious, he was able to recreate Ragnar to such a degree that it may as well have been him. And like the fact that Ragnar is essentially like he left heaven, he moved heaven and hell just so he could say goodbye, is heartbreaking, because it's not only the death of Ragnar and like the final like nail for that character that he's probably gone from here on out, but it's also to an extent the death of Prince Canute in the way that we knew him, the pacifist, the scaredy cat, the character who was all about God, because that also gets tested, and it's an exit for that version of this character. He really does feel like he's embraced this side of him that he didn't want. He never wanted to be royalty. He never wanted to be a king, never wanted to be a prince, never wanted to be any of it. And by the end of this episode, you see him sort of in an almost like Tokyo Ghoul-esque way. He embraces the darker side of him. He embraces that other self that he does not want to be. He embraces that and joins with it and becomes this new Prince Canute in a genuinely moving couple of scenes, both him saying goodbye to Ragnar, him talking to the priest, and him at the very end with that whole like cloak wave thing in the snow. Like, he looks like an absolute boss. He looks like a king. And that's him just embracing who he truly was this entire time. And it is phenomenal stuff. Like, I can't stress enough how much his arc was a joy to watch this entire episode. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the themes in this week's episode, because it's heavy on theme. Like I said at the beginning of the video, the episode really dives into what it means to love and what love truly is. And as far as the priest is concerned, love is just letting things be the way they were before humanity took over. And he feels like there is no such thing as love in humanity's heart, because they can't love, like, for whatever religious nonsense. And to me, when that was happening, when that conversation was happening, I really did feel for a second, like, I was like, is Kenneth learning the wrong lesson? Because this feels like the wrong lesson. But even the mere fact that it's something that the show would bring up and try to tackle is entirely admirable. I disagree. I think like saying that it was what did he say it was? That it was discrimination, I think he said. It was a little goofy. I was like, no, that's not what Ragnar felt. Ragnar loved you, dude. He really, really did. And I know that the priest is going to say that, oh, it's discrimination, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, nah, I feel like you're learning the wrong lesson. Until CANUTE said, screw God. And if he's out there, why would he make us this way? Why would he do this and then tell us to seek love anyway? He's full of it. And I was like, damn, CANUTE, oh my gosh. I almost said, oh my God, but I mean, I feel like he'd be upset at me for saying that. It was such a shocking twist to see him not only reject God, but also to embrace this world that he finds himself in, and to find new meaning in everything that he's doing, everything that the people around him are doing. He wants to be the meaning behind it all. He wants to help these people find meaning, to live and to die, and to fight in some cases. And even when he like embraces Bjorn, that was like a mind screw for, because the entire time, like, if you kill Bjorn, all of this goodwill that I had towards you is gonna explode. Like, it'll all go in the garbage if Bjorn dies because of CANUTE, because I was legitimately like worried that he was gonna stab Bjorn or something like that. But no, he just sort of embraces Bjorn, and even Bjorn sort of snaps out of his insanity for a second, and he's like, Prince, what's going on here? And then I can't remember the brother's name off the top of my head, but the dude with the blonde hair and the ponytail, he shows up and stabs Bjorn, and I screamed out loud, because Bjorn, as you guys know, he's one of my favorite characters. So I was like, not Bjorn. I can't do this without him, man. You can't get rid of Bjorn. I literally could not continue without Bjorn. I need him. See, he's my Ragnar. Like, you can't take away Bjorn. And it looks like he's gonna be okay. I think it looks like they're gonna treat his wounds. And in that moment with of CANUTE being like, protect, like, take care of him. I'm gonna go talk to Thorkel. And I was like, yo, what is going on? Prince CANUTE is an absolute king. I really can't think of a better word right now. He is being very kingly. He's being a solid leader. Like I said, he embraced that part of him that he tried to fight for years and years and years. He just wanted to be Ragnar's son. He never wanted to be the prince, but now he is truly the prince that was promised. He has to embrace that side in order to find meaning. And I don't know. You could talk about the themes. Like, I guarantee you, like, after I finish recording this, I'll probably feel differently about the themes in this week's episode, because they're so heavy and you could really discuss them with others and like find different meanings. Like, over the course of an entire conversation, you could find probably like many different meanings to what the themes are what the author is trying to say here. And it's like I said, it's just Vinland Saga feels very different and special, and there's not too many shows like it this year, and there's not too many shows like it in general. And I don't know, I just really, really loved this week's episode. With that said, everybody, I think it's obvious I'm going to give this week's episode a very solid rank of S. There's been a lot of S ranks this week. I don't know what the hell's going on, but I'm not upset about it. And on that note, everybody, that's going to wrap up today's video. But before we take off, I want to give a big shout out to the good folks over on Patreon, namely those in the Earl Grey tier: Calvin Atkinson, Crowbar of Irony, Dominic, Urza, Ginkotaku, No For Nothing, Maria Teresa, Mirth Mouser, Omner Garamond, Cell, Shadow Creative, Sipco Games, Somastan, Steven, Tristan, Verdon, and Westbourne Eastbred. A huge thank you to those of you who support the channel over on Patreon, and if you too would like to join the T Squadron, then be sure to check out that first link in the description to check out our Patreon page, see all the cool rewards you can get over there, as well as access to our Patreon exclusive Discord. Thanks once again for checking out today's video, everybody. If you enjoyed it, then you've probably been on the internet long enough to know what to do already, so I ain't gonna tell you, but I will say that it is appreciated. And if you are feeling stressed out today, then you go have yourself a warm cup of tea, and I will talk to you all again real soon.